More than a month has now passed since the United States and Israel launched a large-scale military campaign against Iran. What was initially expected to be a swift and decisive operation has now evolved into something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more unpredictable. When the war began on February 28, 2026, the objective appeared clear. The United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes targeting Iran's military infrastructure, weapons facilities, command centers, and key strategic locations. The idea was to overwhelm Iran quickly, to disrupt its capabilities, and potentially force a strategic collapse. But that outcome never materialized. Instead of collapsing, Iran responded, and it responded with speed, coordination, and intensity. Within hours, waves of missiles were launched, followed by hundreds and then thousands of drones moving across the region. These attacks were not symbolic. They were targeted, calculated, and designed to send a clear message that Iran was prepared for a prolonged confrontation. Now, more than 1 month into the conflict, the war has transformed. It is no longer a short-term military campaign. It is a sustained, multi-layered conflict involving military strikes, economic pressure, and strategic positioning across an entire region. One of the most critical developments in this war is not happening directly on the battlefield, but in one of the most important waterways in the world, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage carries a significant portion of the world's oil supply. For decades, it has been considered one of the most sensitive chokepoints in global trade. Today, that chokepoint is under severe pressure. Iran has taken steps to restrict movement through the strait, creating immediate disruption. Oil tankers have been delayed, shipping routes have been affected, and global energy markets are reacting with increasing volatility. The impact is already being felt across multiple continents. Energy prices are rising, inflation concerns are growing, and governments around the world are closely monitoring the situation. Analysts are warning that if this disruption continues, it could trigger one of the most serious supply shocks in modern history. At the same time, the military situation continues to escalate. The United States has reinforced its presence in the region, deploying additional troops, aircraft, and naval forces. Israel continues its operations, targeting what it describes as high-value strategic threats. Airstrikes, missile exchanges, and defensive operations are continuing on a daily basis, but Iran has not stepped back. Instead, it has adapted its strategy. Rather than engaging in a conventional head-to-head military confrontation, Iran is relying on asymmetric tactics. These include the use of low-cost drones, high-frequency missile launches, and decentralized operations designed to stretch and pressure its opponents. This approach is changing the nature of the war. Instead of a direct contest of strength, the conflict is becoming a test of endurance and cost. Iran is attempting to impose a long-term burden on the United States and its allies, forcing them to spend significantly more resources over time. In practical terms, this means that relatively inexpensive systems are being used to challenge far more expensive military technology. A drone that costs a small fraction of advanced equipment can still cause serious damage. This dynamic is creating a growing imbalance in operational costs. At the same time, there are emerging concerns about supply and sustainability. Reports indicate that high-end munitions are being used at a rapid pace. Production capabilities, however, are limited. Even with significant financial resources, the ability to quickly replace advanced systems is not unlimited. This raises questions about how long such a high-intensity conflict can be maintained. Beyond the military dimension, this war is also becoming a battle of influence and perception. Iran is attempting to demonstrate that it cannot be easily subdued, that it has the ability to respond, adapt, and impose consequences. This is not only directed at its immediate adversaries but also at other regional and global actors. The message is clear. Any attempt to escalate the conflict will come with increasing costs, and those costs will not be limited to the battlefield. This concept is often described as deterrence. It is not about achieving total victory in the traditional sense, but about shaping the behavior of opponents by making further escalation too costly to pursue. At the same time, the geopolitical implications of this conflict are expanding. This is no longer just a regional confrontation between a few countries. It is now influencing global markets, international diplomacy, and strategic decision-making at the highest levels. Major powers are closely watching the situation. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, but progress remains uncertain. Some countries are calling for de-escalation, while others are taking a more cautious approach, balancing their strategic interests with the risks of deeper involvement. Within alliances, there are also signs of strain. Not all partners are aligned on how to respond. Some are hesitant to escalate further, concerned about the long-term consequences of a wider conflict. Others remain committed to maintaining pressure on Iran. This divergence highlights a broader issue. In a complex and interconnected world, large-scale conflicts rarely remain contained. They tend to expand, drawing in additional actors and creating ripple effects far beyond the initial point of confrontation. Another important aspect of this war is the economic dimension. The disruption of energy supplies is only one part of the story. Trade routes, investment flows, and financial markets are all being affected. Uncertainty is increasing, and with it, the risk of broader economic instability. For many countries, this is not just a distant conflict. It is something that directly impacts fuel prices, supply chains, and overall economic conditions. As the situation continues to evolve, there is also growing concern about the potential for further escalation. The involvement of additional regional actors remains a possibility. The use of more advanced or unconventional capabilities cannot be ruled out. Each new development increases the stakes and reduces the margin for error. At the same time, there are still efforts to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. Diplomatic channels remain open, even if they are limited. Behind the scenes, negotiations, communications, and back-channel discussions are taking place. These efforts are aimed at reducing tensions and finding a path towards stability. However, the outcome remains uncertain. What is clear is that this conflict is testing long-standing assumptions about power, strategy, and global influence. For years, it was widely believed that overwhelming military strength would be sufficient to achieve rapid and decisive outcomes. This war is challenging that idea. It is showing that resilience, adaptability, and strategic positioning can play an equally important role. It is also highlighting the growing complexity of modern warfare, where economic, technological, and psychological factors are just as important as traditional military capabilities. In many ways, this conflict represents a shift away from short, decisive wars, toward longer, more complicated engagements, a shift from direct confrontation toward indirect pressure and strategic maneuvering, and potentially a shift in the broader global order. Because as this war continues, one question becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Who is actually winning? On paper, the United States and Israel still maintain overwhelming military superiority. Their capabilities, resources, and technological advantages remain significant. But in practice, the situation is far less clear. The conflict is ongoing, the costs are rising, the risks are increasing, and the outcome remains uncertain. This is no longer just a question of military success. It is a question of sustainability, resilience, and long-term consequences. As the world watches closely, the next phase of this conflict will be critical. Decisions made in the coming days and weeks could determine not only the direction of the war, but also the stability of an entire region. And perhaps even more than that, the future of global power dynamics. This is a developing story. The situation remains highly volatile, and we will continue to bring you the latest updates as they unfold.